People of the YouTube, it's Multiplier here with some synthesis tips for how to make a huge dubstep sound in Serum. I'm basically going to run through four important ideas that I used in this sound. There's about 15 different ideas, so I can't do it all in one video. But 4 interesting ideas that I did in this preset that will help you make better and more fly and more dope dubstep sounds. So, pretty amazing if I don't say so myself, and I do because it is my preset as part of Serum Heavy Bass Essentials. Link below in the description and stuff if you like this and many more. 99 more other bass presets. More other is a good grammatical sentence, by the way. More other bass presets, link below for realsies. So, idea number one. Idea number one is because you have 2 oscillators, you can put one oscillator in the center, one oscillator on the sides, and therefore you're providing different harmonic content in the center versus the sides, and then you have this big, crazy, wide and interesting thing because you have something going on here, and then you're like this, and that's just pretty sweet. So you can see in this case we have oscillator B, unison number of 1, so it's in the center. And then we have oscillator A, press the button. Oscillator A with a unison number of 2, so it's spreading the voices either side, therefore it's a wide sound. And therefore we have different harmonic content on the sides of the mix. And I think that's pretty cool. Together, you get this cool stuff happening because you have something here and something on the sides. Really useful for big, complicated, chaotic dubstep sounds. Idea number two. Idea number 2 is to do with the modulation. So we have one defining LFO doing one defining modulation for our sound. You can see this LFO1 is our main modulation. Yes, technically we have something happening for LFO2, but that's just more of an auxiliary thing. That's not our main modulation for our sound. If you look at what LFO1 is doing, it's got something aggressive happening at the beginning, which is the attack portion of our sound, basically differentiating the start of the note from the sustained portion. See how there's that first bit where it goes really fast, that gives it a nice biting attack. But then crucially, for the sustain portion, there's a little bit of movement, which basically gives the sound a less flat, dynamically boring result. Because this LFO1 this LFO1 is modulating quite a few things. It's modulating the wavetable position on both oscillators, a warp thing, this bend plus on oscillator A, and the cutoff position of a filter. So it's doing a lot. It's basically defining the modulation. If it was flat, if there wasn't that slight movement in LFO1 for the sustain portion of the sound, it'd be like, cool, and then it'd be like, boring. So you don't want that. You want to go, cool, little bit of subtle movement, and especially when you combine that with the fact that it's modulating the cutoff of this crazy comb filter, it just has this nice movement, evolving sound, and that's what gives the sustain portion just such a cool vibe. See how the sustain has a nice bit of movement? That's because of how we've programmed in LFO1. Idea number 3. This one is boring, but it's important. Pay attention right now. This is important information for your brain if you ever make a sound. Whenever we are doing a bass preset, we're not just talking about dubstep bass, but in general, we never want to play 2 bass notes at the same time, ever. Or I suppose 1 in a million times you can get away with it. But basically, we never want to layer up, we never want to layer up bass, and the extension of that is we never even want to overlap bass notes. So if we're playing in a bass idea, we never want to overlap MIDI notes on the keyboard, therefore there's no bass sounds overlapping in the bass sound that comes out. Now, when you first load up Serum, it won't stop you overlapping bass notes. However, there's a button that we can turn on. Mono, which is short for monophony. Like monorail. Did you see that episode of The Simpsons with the monorail? It's like that. Monorail, one rail, monophony, one voice, in other words, one MIDI note at a time. When you trigger this mono button, it doesn't kick it into mono from a stereo imaging perspective. It actually kicks it into monophony mode. In other words, when mono is triggered, you can't overlap bass sounds. If you try to overlap, you can see it basically just skips to the next note you triggered. So if I hold down this note and then trigger this one, then this one will stop playing as soon as this one starts playing. So basically, whenever you make a bass preset, that's another pun, the same pun actually, but a pretty funny pun, I would say, basically, whenever you program a bass, just get in the habit, get in the routine of going to the voicing section, turning on the monophony button, and therefore you'll never accidentally overlap bass sounds. And it means you can trigger bass in a brand new way that you couldn't really do before. So you can do things like, doesn't make sense for this sound. For this preset, that makes no sense at all. But if you have a different sort of bass sound, you can trigger notes like that, and it just sounds really cool. So whenever you do a bass preset, just get in the routine, basically, of turning on the monophony button, and therefore no bass overlappage will happen. And finally, idea number 4 is that we've actually done our distortion inside the filter module. We haven't used the separate effects called distortion, because to me at least, and to lots of other people who have ears, it sounds a lot better if you do your distortion inside the filter compared to the distortion effect module. It's just really difficult to get good results with the distortion as an effect module. So if you just want to add some extra harmonics and thicken up a sound in a nice and simple way, it's certainly not an advanced distortion by any means, we can use the drive control in the filter. Now, I've actually mapped it to a macro, so if I click this macro, we can see this macro is turned to the right extreme. Therefore, you can see we are actually on the full limit of the drive. We have it cranked up to the max. To give you an idea of what it would have sounded like before the distortion, I can always ease back on this drive control. Which certainly sounds really cool. That's why I actually left that macro there, because sometimes it can be quite nice to have that kind of freaky sound. But saying that, there's a time and a place. They're just different sounds. So if I do want distortion, I'll just crank up the drive. But you see how it's basically thickened it up, added in more frequencies? That's what you do with distortion. Love it, especially when you distort that comb filter. It just sounds fantastic. So that's basically what the drive does, is adding distortion as part of the filter module, and it just sounds amazing. I tried to analyze the peaks one day, and I think it's similar to a tube distortion in terms of the way in which it's doing its distortion, but it just sounds really good. So yeah, definitely use the drive instead of using the actual effects in the effects section. And as a final little note relating to that tip, so this isn't tip number 5, it's kind of 4.5. This is tip number 4.5. What I've done is route my sub oscillator into the filter module so that gets distorted as part of the distortion process. So you can see here we have the filter module, the little S triggered. That means the sub oscillator is going into the filter module, and that's getting distorted with all these other harmonics and stuff that's happening. And there you go, 4.5 tips for making huge dubstep sounds in Serum. Huge. And yeah, as I say, either make them yourself, or if you want this preset and many, many more, there is a link to my pack, Serum Heavy Bass Essentials, below. 100 of the most super fly, super dope, detailed, interesting, creative, heavy, etc. presets. They're amazing. Check them out. I know you're going to love them. Sweet.